Hey guys, it's Libby. Welcome to my June wrap-up. I got through 21 books this month. 18 of them were novels, and then of course there was one play, one short story collection, and one work of nonfiction. The bulk of those books was Lemony Snicket's series of unfortunate events with the companion books. I am not holding up all of them right now. I'm holding up a representative sample. These got their own review in a video which should already be up. So all of my thoughts about those are available over there. I gave all 15 of the books 5 stars because I think of this series as a 5-star series, and I was lazy and didn't want to precisely go through and consider which books do I like better than others, and is this one just a 4-star? Is this a 4.5? And if it is, what do I list it as on Goodreads? Decided to not have to bother with that and just give them all 5 stars. If you are curious, I think my favorite is number 6, The Ersatz Elevator. And having gone on that delightful middle grade binge, I wanted to read some new to me middle grade, so I poked around and decided to try Pax by Sara Pennypacker. And maybe it was unfair to read this after such a good series. I was not particularly impressed, and I did end up DNFing this after a couple of chapters. So this is set during World War II. It's about a young boy and his pet fox. The boy has to go live with his grandfather out in the country because his dad is doing war stuff, and this means he has to get rid of his pet fox. And the story is told intermittently from the perspective of the fox and the boy, because immediately after they separate, they realize that the fox always thought this was a bad idea. The boy realizes that this was a bad idea and he wants to find his fox. So it's about them trying to get back together. Do they get back together? Presumably, I don't know, because I didn't finish it. I have heard from other reviews people saying that the end is really sad and intense. I mainly put this down for the prose rather than the story. The story was perfectly adequate, but not enough to keep me going through the prose, because I think one of the big problems was that every sentence was the same length, so that was not very interesting to read, and they're all sort of mid-length. I mean, you can get away with having an entire book of very short sentences and make it work, and you could probably get away with having a book, if not entirely long sentences and 90% really long sentences, but just every sentence having the same flow. I was bored, and it was sometimes confusing what was going on, and so I just decided, no, I am not loving this. Let us move to greener pastures. And those greener pastures belong to Emma Donoghue. I read her short story collection, Astray. This has a 3.58 rating on Goodreads, which is actually pretty good for Emma Donoghue books. Room has a crazy good rating, and then I think The Wonder has a decent rating, but most of her books have under 3.5 ratings. I have read several times her collection of interconnected short stories called Kissing the Witch, which I completely loved, and decided to ignore the low ratings. Normally, if a book is below a 3.5, I will give it a miss. But since I was so impressed by Kissing the Witch, I have tried to go into Emma Donoghue books with belief in her artistic ability, and that was rewarded with The Wonder. Not so much rewarded with Astray. I think this one was just kind of fine, which it makes me sad that it was fine because I want to be able to defend her, but alas, not today. So I think this book is more interesting than good. Her approach to inspiration for these stories is unique. She's gone through old records like newspapers and court records from the 17th through 20th centuries, and found little snippets referencing people who are not famous but who did some sort of strange thing, and then she concocts a short story based on the information she could get from these records. So you read the story, and then in the afterword you get to find out where this story came from, and what parts of it are definitively true as opposed to the parts that were made up. To be perfectly honest, I generally found the afterword to be more interesting than the story, which I guess means I should choose my reading material from old newspapers and court records now. But there were 2 short stories which were actually consecutive, which I did quite like. One was The Widow's Cruise, Crus? I have never encountered this word before and don't know how to pronounce it, which was clearly building up to a twist, and I did guess a twist, but I was wrong. I thought I had it all figured out, but nope, something else was happening. And then the Last Supper at Brown's was also quite good. I give the collection overall 3 stars. Then I made another attempt at middle grade with Kelly Barnhill's The Girl Who Drank the Moon. I thought I would be in good hands with Kelly Barnhill because I had read her adult short story during 2 Torathons ago called Mrs. Sorensen and the Sasquatch, which I thought was very weird and interesting and thoughtful. So I was hoping things would go well with this. They went okay. This is middle grade fantasy. In the beginning, we are introduced to a village which is run by like some corrupt leadery people who have convinced the villagers that periodically they need to sacrifice a newborn baby to the witch who lives in the woods, because if they don't, then she will come and like destroy everybody. And this is of course a mechanic for keeping the populace in control. The elders don't think that there actually is a witch, and they think they're just abandoning a child to be eaten by wild animals, but there actually is in fact a witch who doesn't really know what's going on, and she just knows that sometimes when she goes to this particular spot in the wood, there's like a baby who needs help. So she takes the baby through the woods and emerges on the other side and finds a nice family, and then these kids are grow up to be kind of special because as she is taking them through the woods, she feeds them on starlight. She pulls the webs of starlight out from the sky and feeds it to the baby, and this makes them special. So for our main character, the witch finds her as a baby, but isn't quite paying attention because she's got such beautiful eyes, and she feeds her on moonlight instead. And moonlight is intensely powerful magic. So this child is full with intensely powerful magic, and the witch knows that she can't give this baby to be raised by normal people, so she decides to raise the child herself. And so this girl, Luna, is raised by the witch and her friends, a swamp monster and a very small dragon that they have convinced is a very large dragon, and adventure proceeds from there. I was kind of disappointed in this after how interesting Mrs. Sorensen and the Sasquatch was. However, I fully admit that this book is not for me, and for that reason I have refrained from rating it. One of the problems that I had with it was that the morality was incredibly uncomplex, which I know is like because it is for children and I am not a child, so like this was not written for my adult sense of morality. So I just am not that much of a high fantasy person, which I should have remembered before deciding to read a high fantasy book. High fantasy is just so genuine, and I am a dark and cynical soul. But not to be too down on it, there were good things about it. One thing that I liked was that Luna, since she's been raised with magic people and she hasn't been raised with like other children, so she doesn't know that she can do magic, doesn't really think of the magic that she does as magic, so she will like just casually turn things into other things, which the witch then has to undo, and this gets very draining. And when the witch tells her like you need to not do magic right now, Luna just says, "What's magic? Like I just do stuff. I just think that table would look better as a potato," and then it just is. So yes, The Girl Who Drank the Moon, unrated because it was not for me, but it could be for you. Then the next thing I finished was The Merry Wives of Windsor for the Bard Book Club. You can check out all of my thoughts on that in the Bard Book Club video. I do generally refrain from rating books in the Bard Book Club thing, so this got 3 stars. It's a fun, light comedy, but just so little to chew on. And after Merry Wives of Windsor, I got through the Tudor Tailor by Ninya, Mikhaila, and Jane Malcolm-Davies. This is one of my sewing books, which I normally don't talk about on this channel. I talk about my like literature books, which is, you know, novels and like nonfiction that is meant to be read cover to cover. Because most of my books about sewing, I don't read cover to cover. I dip in for what I need. And I decided to pick this up because I'm going to costume college at the end of the month, and I need to have an early Regency gown finished by then, which means I'm working very hard on it, which means, of course, I want to study the 16th century. The costuming attention deficit disorder is strong. So the Tudor Tailor is really for costumers. The first 50 pages are the actual like reading material, and this is where they talk about you know, what sorts of fabric types were available and what are the names for those fabric types, what garments were people wearing, how did this relate to class, all that sort of stuff. And then the last 100 pages are patterns with instructions. So here's the pattern of a loose robe, which when I made up looks like one of those, with instructions. And I did not read the instructions because, yeah, that would be boring. All of the content in here is very good, but I gave this 4 stars rather than 5 for 2 reasons. One is that they totally skip over like the mid-Elizabethan period. You get like 15, for women's clothes at least, I didn't pay that much attention to the men's, but you get how to make clothes in the pattern section. They covered this in the text section at the beginning. But you get patterns for like 1530s, 40s, and then they go all the way to the end of the century with 1590s, and I am like, I am kind of here for the 1570s, and there is nothing for me, so I have to, you know, post hoc combine different pieces of different patterns together, which, you know, I've sewn stuff before. I know how to make a Franken pattern, but I bought this book so that I could be lazy and not have to do stuff like this, and I'm like, why don't you just let me be lazy? And then the other thing is that I would have preferred, it would have been more useful for me if the text at the beginning had been better integrated with the patterns, although I acknowledge that if you aren't really interested in the patterns, it is of course more convenient to have all of the text there at the beginning. So, so let's find a pretty dress for people to look at while I talk. Okay, so here's a pattern for a woman's doublet bodice, and what I would really like to know, and what is not included here, is like, what fabric should I make this out of? I mean, I already know it's obviously wool, but like, to what material should it be lined with? What decades is this specific style appropriate for? And if I make slight alterations to the pattern, what decades can I make it appropriate for? What social class is wearing this? Is it universal? Does it depend on fabric choice? What kind of things were commonly accessorized with it? And that information does exist, but it's all up here in the beginning, which basically means like anytime I make something from this, I'm going to have to find what I want to make and then reread all 50 pages at the beginning to get all of the additional information that I would like. Why can't I just be lazy? So Tudor Tailor, probably not something that most of you will read because it's a niche interest, but 4 stars. And then the last thing that I finished, technically in July, but why wait to wrap it up until the July wrap up, was Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence, which you know is getting its own review, so look forward to that. For now, I'll just say I gave it 4 stars and leave you dangling. Okay, thank you for joining me for this wrap up. Stay tuned for more Lady Chatterley, and I will see you soon.